He's an absolutely awful man. Lord Hermer should be sacked. Lord Hermer decided, he's a political appointment by the Labour Party, the Attorney General, and he decided that it was a matter of national public interest that Tommy Robinson's case should be taken from being a civil case to a criminal case. Yeah. Now, at no level, in my view, is it of a national public interest. And that was the bar he had to get over to convince himself that this had to go now criminal. Yeah. So it was an appointed politician of the worst sort, a terrorist sympathizer, sue me if you want to, Lord Hermer, a terrorist sympathizer who decided to convert Tommy Robinson's case from one of civil action to criminal action. And then the court threw the book at Tommy Robinson.
I'm here in London reporting with Rebel News at the Orc event. Now, I bumped into Ben Habib and I asked him what was meant to be for a quick chat, but turned into quite the lengthy discussion, and he had plenty to say. Ben, for people that are watching this and they don't know who you are, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Ben Habib. I was a businessman all my life. I only got into politics initially I was sort of triggered by what Mark Carney and George Osborne were saying during the referendum campaign to leave the EU, because I thought they talked, garbage basically, and I couldn't understand why it was that our the Bank of England's governor and the Chancellor of the Exchequer would be misleading the British people. So that got my antenna up. And then Theresa May promised she would deliver Brexit. She said all the right things, and I retreated into the background again. And then it became obvious she wasn't going to do the right thing. And someone said, do you want to meet Nigel Farage? So I said, yeah, why not? I don't meet many racist, xenophobic, far-right individuals. Let's go and meet him. And of course, Nigel's none of that. He's a perfectly reasonable human being. And that too, I've been on a very long journey of discovery of how twisted the media is, how twisted reporting is. And, meeting Nigel for the first time was, a step in that direction. And then I became a Brexit Party MEP, went to the European Parliament, and as I've gone through this journey of discovery, I've realized how precarious the position of our country is. I think there's a belief in this country that everything will be all right on the night, because we've been fortunate enough for the last couple of 100 years or whatever for things to just work out. But I don't think we can take it for granted. Yeah. And I do think the United Kingdom at the moment faces a threat to its very existence, its constitution. I'm wearing a badge at the moment which says no sea border. And that's because we have become the first country in the world to voluntarily partition itself. We've put a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which I find absolutely disgusting. But it's an example of how our political class is destroying this country, constitutionally, politically, democratically, culturally, criminal justice-wise, which I know we're going to be talking about. In every single aspect, this country is facing its end unless we get a grip of it.
Yeah, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but you mentioned the media, and I suppose I have a love-hate relationship with the media. I've worked with him for about 12 years. I first worked with Andrew Norfolk at the Times when we exposed the Rotherham child abuse scandal. So I know when the media and journalists get this right, we can make a real difference with the media. They're so powerful. Yeah. But what I've kind of learned in the last year, and I think I've had a bit of an awakening in the last year about media, about politics, is just how much they can lie. They can twist and manipulate the truth. And when I've been speaking to people around the country, what I've realised is they have a real hate for the media. What direction do you think the media is going in, and why do you think they're doing it?
So I think, thankfully, the media is now multifaceted. For most of our respective lives, the media has been dominated by the BBC, basically. And so we've taken the BBC line, whatever that is. And which is why I had to go on a journey of discovery myself, because I'd listened to the BBC all my life. And but thankfully, I think the media is now multifaceted, and I think social media gives people an opportunity to see things from a different perspective. And there's no doubt in my mind that Elon Musk buying Twitter and now X
he's caused some ruffling and feathers.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump would necessarily have been elected if Elon Musk hadn't bought X. Yeah. And if Donald Trump hadn't been elected, we wouldn't have had that brilliant speech from J.D. Vance in Munich the other day, which I think is seismic. I think it sets, for the first time actually, when Donald Trump was elected, I felt, great. But when I heard J.D. Vance's speech, effectively the American administration calling out precisely the thing that you're touching on now, the shutting down of free speech, the misrepresentation of truth by those who govern us, not just the mainstream media, but those who govern us, arresting people for standing silently 50 meters from an abortion clinic, cancelling elections when it doesn't suit them. I mean, we know this. They turned their back on Brexit when we voted to leave the EU. That was all shut down. We never got Brexit. We haven't left the EU, by the way. People think we have. We left Northern Ireland behind. We're still hitched at the hip in a very significant way, which I won't bore you with right now, to the EU. All these things are hidden by the mainstream media. But social media can't hold them back. People like you and me can have a chat here. We can speak down this camera and people can hear what we have to say and it'll get out there.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk has made a huge difference. And I'll be honest, I've never been, a social media kind of savvy person. Quite disliked social media, but I realised its importance when I started doing my online reporting. And we started with the Reform election. First time I'd ever voted, actually, I voted Reform. But we also
So
covered...
what, this general election just now?
Yes, the one just gone, yes. Yeah. So, but not long afterwards was, of course, Southport. Yeah. And we call it the Southport riots. Now, the riots, in my opinion, started in Haw Hills when the Roma community rioted for, the child that got removed. And then we went to Manchester where the Pakistani community rioted for the Manchester airport incident. And then, of course, there was Southport. Now, when we was attending the protests and riots, we saw the good, the bad, the ugly. But what we did was just upload the evidence and speak to people that was there with their concerns. And the media really went against me for that. And tried to cancel me, actually, in a lot of ways, and make my life very difficult. But
Well, good for you for doing it.
Yeah, but what we kind of was able to do was show the people the truth of what was happening because of X. And they say, we are the media now, the people are the media. Do you think that's going to have a big impact on mainstream media?
Yeah, I think mainstream media is becoming redundant. How many people get their news from the BBC now? It's an ever smaller number of people, isn't it? I mean, I don't get my news from the BBC. No. I used to.
Yeah, I used to work with the BBC. I refuse now.
Yeah, and so I don't get my news from them. I mean, there are some good journalists on the BBC. I don't want to denigrate every single one of them. They won't have me on again if I say that, but because you do have to be on. But so I think people are looking at them less and getting their news from different sources, and they're also able to cross-reference the various news flows they're getting to determine who's really telling the truth. When you can triangulate lots of different stories, you can see where the meeting point is, and that's probably the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the rape gangs, which is obviously my area. I've been an activist on this for 12 years and I've also lived it. And I've watched your interviews and, there's been a lot of talk recently with, again, Elon Musk tweeting about this. But this is something that's been happening since, the Sikh community was talking about it in the 1970s. Yeah. Why has it taken so long for people to be having these conversations about what's happening to children in this country, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's part of this liberal global order where, I'm going to reverse 1 second. So in 1998, which is obviously not in the 1970s, but in 1998, we took on board in this country, wholesale, the European Convention of Human Rights and embodied it in the Human Rights Act. And that basically, when you look at what the human rights are that are now established in British law, they make no distinguishing between British citizenry or foreign people. Everyone is to be treated absolutely the same. The right of expression, the right of association, the right of beliefs, all the rest of it, right to family life, etc., etc. But there is no difference between being a British citizen now and being a foreigner in this country. You get exactly the same protections as a result of the Human Rights Act and the adoption of the European Convention into our domestic law. But then we went one step further. We went a few steps further after that, and we introduced the Equalities Act and then ran the Equalities Act. At the same time, a couple of years before the Equalities Act, actually, the Companies Act in this country was changed, which is the act that governs corporates, and something new was introduced called stakeholder capital, effectively social justice. Stakeholder capitalism was introduced, and companies had to look after the communities in which they were operating, amongst other obligations. And the Equalities Act effectively does not make people equal. It gives preferential treatment to ethnic minorities and ethnic minorities, people of minor religious beliefs, minor sexual preferences, transgender ideology. If you've got a particular belief system that is in the minority, you get protected through the Equalities Act. It's got nothing to do with being equal, the Equalities Act. It's a misnomer. And then out of the changes made to the Companies Act and the Equalities Act has emerged this whole landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is effectively a protected blanket at every level, through the criminal justice system, societal, employment, everything. If you're part of that minority set that I've described, you have a protected blanket around you. In fact, you're not just protected, you are promoted, which is why we see silly things like MI5 recruiting people from ethnic minorities as opposed to people who are capable of spying. We see the RAF recruiting fighter pilots on the basis of their ethnicity, not on their capability to fly a jet. And all of this is now symptomatic of a society which is in full progressive, what they call progressive discrimination, full tilt at progressive discrimination, which is actually discrimination. And it's discrimination against the majority of the people in this country. It's positive discrimination is nothing more than discrimination. And we've become a racist society, a society where the majority are on the receiving end of that racism. It's a most peculiar thing, and we've done this completely of our own volition, which is why J.D. Vance in Munich was absolutely right when he said the threat to the West, the real threat, is not from China and Russia, it's from within. We've created these things which are destroying ourselves. And so DEI, the Equalities Act, the Human Rights Act, all of that has to be removed from the fabric of our legislative system. Our political landscape needs to have all of that removed. But anyway, it's there. And even before it was there, because we are a very sensitive, caring, welcoming nation, we've been extremely nervous of ever being accused of being racist against minorities. And I think that has dumbed down, and particularly now with this regulatory legal framework, it has dumbed down the ability for the criminal justice system, in particular social services and other schools, etc., from identifying problems that are based on ethnic minorities or any element of difference in races, and they're not prepared to call it out because they don't want to trip up. They themselves don't want to be accused of being racist, etc. And so we have fallen into a system where the criminal justice system, our social services, our schooling, all of it is basically prejudiced.
I mean, when we look at Rotherham, because overall we've never had that data and that research about what's happened, with the rape gangs, which is something we're trying to fight for. We know as well that police aren't even been recording people's ethnicities. But when we look at Rotherham, and we've got the information that majority of the offenders were Pakistani Muslim men, and a lot of people were scared to approach that in case they were called racist or Islamophobic. And when we do talk about it, even now, we are called racist or Islamophobic. But what no one's addressing is that majority of the children targeted were white. So why are we racist for calling them out, but they're not being called racist for targeting white children?
Well, I mean, it's because of this regulatory and legal framework that we have created, which is so damaging it's damaging to the country. We are literally letting criminals get away with horrendous, heinous criminal activity for fear of being accused of racism. I mean, it's just, it's bizarre.
Do you think that children were targeted because they were white, or do you think it's because we are majority of a white nation?
Before you started this recording, you mentioned to me that perhaps it's simply because there's a majority of white girls. I'd never considered that. I've always thought that this was a racist attack.
To be honest, it's only something I've been kind of thinking about the last few days.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh,
Well,
okay.
statistically, I mean, I think one would need to look at the statistics and of course we don't have the stats available to really
exactly.
analyze it. You know, people keep saying we don't need an inquiry. The government says we don't need an inquiry into this because we had that inquiry, the name of which escapes me at the moment.
The ICSA. The
yeah.
thing is, I mean, the
But
ICSA didn't
It didn't
focus
look.
on.
It didn't look on.
Exactly.
People kept telling me we've had an inquiry. Go
We
and read it.
haven't,
So
we
I
haven't.
went and read the inquiry, and actually on page 13 of that inquiry, a third of the way down, it says we've made no analysis of the ethnicities of both the perpetrators or the victims.
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't done that, then you can't speak with authority. The Quilliam report, which I think is 2018 or 2017, 2018, I think, is quite clear. It says 85% of gang rapes are perpetrated by people of South Asian origin.
Yeah, I think as well. I mean, a national inquiry can look different for different people. For me, I think we need an inquiry into every single council and police force, like we did at Rotherham. Obviously, it needs to be independent. That would take roughly, I think Rotherham took about a year. I think if you just did one inquiry into everything, it'd take decades. You know, the information would get lost. And we've got to remember as well, towns and cities are different. We need to cater for that. But
so
that
you think the local inquiries are the right way to go?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so you support the Labour government's approach, because I think they're doing 5 local inquiries, aren't they?
Yeah, but not with 5. We need it into every single council and police force in this country, and it has to be independent. They can't investigate themselves.
Yeah, they can't mark their own homework.
Yeah, if we did that, we could have that within a year. And we could have, you know, the basic information. We'd start with the truth, and that's what it did for us in Rotherham. Now, we already have enough evidence in the country to be putting things into place. Like all the recommendations, none of them have been put into place, hardly. So, but I do think that every single council and police force do need that inquiry.
They need to be, I think arrests need to be made, actually, of police officers who've turned a blind eye to what's been going on, and to members of the social services who were charged with the responsibility of safeguarding.
The Home Office now. I mean, my own case proves that the Home Office
is involved. So I mean,
some cases as well. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I've got a child from my exploitation. Many people have. When we're asking for DNA to be taken from those children to prove what happened, because, you know, I was 14 when I met him, he was 24, they're refusing to take the DNA. Why are they doing that? Why are they refusing?
Well, they want to brush it under the carpet.
And as we also know, rapists can go through the family courts and apply for contact and custody of children born from their crimes. We also know immigrants are deliberately getting women pregnant.
There is something else going on here too, I think, Sammy, and it's an awful thing to say, but I suspect it. I haven't got stats to prove it, but anecdotally, I have the impression that judges and the criminal justice system generally, it's not as hard on paedophilia. It doesn't seem prepared to challenge paedophilia. You know, we had this case of this Zimbabwean guy.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
Who was, you know, convicted of paedophilia, but won't be deported back to Zimbabwe for fear of what might happen to him there. But what about
another case just before that, a guy from Pakistan, and they also kept their
right to
identities
family life.
Protected
secret,
as well.
So I mean, there's something sinister going on. And Hugh Edwards, you remember the BBC presenter who had, I can't remember how many photographs of
and the worst category as well.
Yeah, the worst category. And you know, one level you can say, well, it was just photographs. No, but that's perpetrating a trade.
It's still a victim's been hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hugh Edwards should have had the book thrown at him.
Yeah. I think you're right, though, to touch on the judges. And I think we need to start and name these judges and put some real pressure on them, because they are allowing paedophiles to walk free even when found guilty. Whilst we've got people, you know, doing hurty words on social media.
And I think,
going to prison.
If I were to venture an opinion on it, I think, again, its roots in this idea of liberalism. I didn't really talk about liberalism, but the whole human rights thing, the Equalities Act, DEI, it's all embedded in liberalism, where we've got to liberate every individual and allow every individual to do that which they wish to do. Liberalism in this country has gone mad, and it's manifested itself, you know, as a result of things like the Human Rights Act and the Companies Act, etc. And if you take it to its nth degree, what you're basically saying is, well, the individual can decide what kind of sexual relationships he wants, he or she wants. And the victim doesn't matter. Are you with me?
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone that daft. And what we've got to do...
I actually watched, sorry to interrupt you, I actually watched a documentary not so long ago, what's available on social media, and they filmed rapists and they filmed doctors, and they was comparing paedophilia to autism, and they were saying it's not their fault. And I think what is trying to happen from, you know, the top, from the elites, is they are trying to push paedophilia to be normalised. I think that's the direction that they're going with it.
Well, that's horrendous. And over my dead body, you know,
Yeah,
I mean, I
mine
think
too.
we've just got to keep fighting that kind of...
We are.
And I think we're going to win that fight, by the way.
Well, I hope so. You touched on human rights. I'm going to ask you about an activist, you've probably heard of him, called Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, I've heard of him a little bit.
You're right, paying it backside, isn't it? But he's currently in prison for a civil offence.
Yeah.
Now, I know some people don't like Tommy, they don't like his, you know, politics or whatever. However, putting that to one side, he's currently being treated really badly, in my opinion. You know, this is a pure breach of his human rights. He's locked in solitary confinement pretty much all day. He's not being able to eat properly. All his visits are getting cut off.
Yeah.
Why is no one fighting for him?
Yeah, so I don't know Tommy Robinson, but there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, not a shred of doubt, that he is a political prisoner.
Yeah, I agree.
And the reason I say that, and it's very clear that he's a political prisoner, because, as you say, the court case which eventually landed him in prison was a civil action.
Yeah.
It was one of defamation, and he was injuncted against showing a film, which he showed. And normally, what would happen when you breach an injunction in a civil action is the judge yanks you in, you get a rap on your knuckles or wrist or whatever it is, you pay a fine, you might have to pay more damages to the complainant in the case, in this case.
The thing is, though, if I'm right, the complainant weren't even the one trying to push this.
They weren't even pushing it. But then the Attorney General, who is a malignant individual, Lord Hermer, who advocated for Gerry Adams, advocated for illegal migrants in the Chagos Islands, coming from the Chagos Islands to the UK, advocated for the handing over of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, and a whole host of other things that this guy's done. He's an absolutely awful man. Lord Hermer should be sacked. Lord Hermer decided, he's a political appointment by the Labour Party, the Attorney General, and he decided that it was a matter of national public interest that Tommy Robinson's case should be taken from being a civil case to a criminal case. Yeah. Now, at no level, in my view, is it of a national public interest. And that was the bar he had to get over to convince himself that this had to go now criminal.
Yeah.
So it was an appointed politician of the worst sort, a terrorist sympathizer, sue me if you want to, Lord Hermer, a terrorist sympathizer who decided to convert Tommy Robinson's case from one of civil action to criminal action. And then the court threw the book at Tommy Robinson. Yeah. So anyone who can't grasp those facts, can't see the cause and effect of the political interference in Tommy Robinson's case, is in denial.
Yeah, I agree.
And it doesn't matter what you think of Tommy Robinson. I make no apology for Tommy Robinson. I'm not here saying Tommy Robinson is a great guy or a bad guy. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He is a political prisoner. And certain members of certain leaders of certain parties should have the courage to say it.
Yeah, and to be honest, there isn't anyone. I've heard you talk about it, and I've heard Rupert Lowe. Speaking of Rupert Lowe, what do you think of him?
So before we go to Rupert Lowe, why are people quiet on Tommy Robinson? Somehow he has become the Voldemort of public discourse.
Yeah.
No one is prepared to talk about Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating that anyone should talk about Tommy Robinson, but Tommy Robinson, as you rightly said, has a right to an even hand by the law. Doesn't matter what he is.
Yeah.
He has a right to an even hand by the law. And that's where Rupert is strong, because unlike some members of his own parliamentary party, unlike any other of his parliamentary party, he is prepared to speak out.
Yeah. I mean, listen, when I first come forward, 'cause I know Tommy speaks about the grooming gangs, I'll be honest, I never heard of him. But as the years went by, you know, my activism, I was hearing lots of different things, some good, some bad. And I contacted Tommy and I reached out to him and I said, I want to come and, kind of come to this event and see what it's all about. And that's actually how I got into reporting. He said, why don't you come along and do your own little report on it? And what I learned was that a lot of people that was there, they were just ordinary, your working class people, a lot of them survivors, family members, that have been through a lot of trauma, and no one wanted to help them. And I think they look at Tommy as their leader because no political party wants to lead. Now, I'm not saying
this
Tommy...
is precisely the silent majority. These are the overlooked individuals in our society which our system has turned its back on.
Yeah.
That's precisely the constituency for which Reform UK should be speaking.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, that lot, that lot. And the thing is as well, I mean, I don't agree with everything that Tommy's ever said or done, and I've called him out and I've said it to him directly as well. However, he was a person speaking about issues that people didn't want to talk about. Islam, the rape gangs, the immigration. And, when people talk about him and the EDL, which was, God, well over, I think about 15 years ago now. So when, these men took to the streets and they're talking about, the rape of children, and we also know that parents were going to the police, they was being threatened by police officers saying that they'd be arrested and stuff. And they've been criticised for that. But what is it that people want us to do to try and raise the alarm? Because when we took to the streets, we get, said we shouldn't have done that. When we go to the police, we shouldn't. So,
well, you're on the receiving end of everything we've been discussing earlier.
I think he's misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't met Tommy Robinson, but I mean,
I know I've worked with him, so I know him kind of personally as well. But I know he's not an angel, but I think how he's being treated, it's
awful. But also, let's have a thought also for the 70 odd people who were arrested after the Southport, during the Southport protests, the protests that followed the Southport killings, who were arrested and put in jail.
Some of them are still there as well.
For what they said.
Yeah.
For what they said, for what they tweeted.
Yeah.
So let's just remind ourselves what happened. I mean, you know it very well, but just for the sake of viewers. 3 girls were brutally killed. The truth about the killer was suppressed. Other girls were assaulted and nearly lost their lives. We now know actually that the perpetrator was not a Welshman. I don't care what people say.
Yeah.
He may have lived in Cardiff. That doesn't make him a Welshman. When the Prime Minister described Alex Ruda-Cabana as Welshman, he was deflecting. He didn't want the truth to come out that this guy was a second-generation Rwandan British. He's a British citizen, he's not a Welshman. When you say Welshman, it conjures up an image of a farmer in a field with his sheep. That's the image you get, and that's the image he wanted to convey.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister was misleading the British people.
I think it's absolutely disgusting how Keir Starmer led all this. And in fact, I actually spoke to one of the grandfathers of the children. He's very sadly took his own life now. He weren't being supported proper through the Southport thing. But I said to him, who do you think started these riots? And he said there was only one person that started the Southport riot, and that was Keir Starmer.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Because after those killings, if they hadn't suppressed the truth, and instead of turning his back to the crowd when he went to lay flowers in Southport, he'd actually turned around and faced the crowd and spoken to the cameras and said, this is a heinous crime that's been committed in this community, and I will get to the bottom of it, and the causes of that crime, the ability for that individual to have perpetrated this crime will be stamped on, and I will do everything in my power to protect the British people. If he'd said that, there would have been no protests. The nation would have calmed because the Prime Minister would have put his protective blanket around the people of the country.
Exactly.
Instead, he put his protective blanket around Alex Ruda-Cabana, Axel or whatever his name is. And then he went further after the protests, and he said that all those protesting were far-right thugs, and that the criminal justice system would be deployed against them, and they would be arrested, they would be remanded, they were held in custody, and they will be incarcerated. They'll be found guilty and they'll be incarcerated. He actually directed the criminal justice system against a whole load of people that he had judged without a trial.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually out there in the protests and the riots, and I actually had, men coming up to me and saying, where he to look for the EDL, because politicians like Keir Starmer and everybody else was making out that the EDL were on the streets. Now, EDL hadn't existed for many years, but he actually provoked, people coming out
my
to,
God, he
to
did.
cause violence.
Absolutely, he did.
And as well, when some of these men are now in prison, which again, Peter Lynch took his own life whilst in prison.
Keir Starmer's got blood on his hands.
He has. And they haven't just sent men to prison. They've actually targeted their families in housing, and they've been trying to evict them. They've also targeted their animals, and some have had to put their dogs to sleep. So, they've been coming at people from every angle for what should have been freedom of speech. Now, what's frustrating for me is my rapist in prison for 35 years. He's committed the most heinous crime. In fact, he actually received the highest sentence of our history in regards to sexual exploitation. But yet he gets treated better than some of these people, such as Tommy, who's raised the alarm, and Peter Lynch and all of these.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this again, I go back to J.D. Vance's speech where he said it so clearly. The enemy is within. Keir Starmer is anti-British. Keir Starmer,
I think he's far left. I think he's the leader of far left. That's what I call it.
He's an extremist. He's a radical extremist. Look at what he's doing to the country.
But why is it taking people across the pond, such as him and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, to raise what's the problems of our country?
Because I mean, I don't know how old you are, Sammy, but I had the privilege
39.
So I had the privilege of being, I'm older than you, I'm 20 years older than you. Okay. So I had the privilege of being a kind of adult in the 1980s and 90s. What you and I are discussing now would have been absolutely acceptable mainstream discussion back in the 80s and 90s. But the center of gravity of acceptable discussion has now been yanked to an extreme left position. So the only extreme left views of the support of the kind that in favor of progressive discrimination, shutting down free speech, shutting down the majority's interest, shutting down the right to a fair trial. Only that narrative is allowed to be spoken about on mainstream. And that's why it's so critical. It is vital that Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage have the courage to come out and lead the way to move the center of gravity of acceptable political discourse to a position that is reasonable, because at the moment we are living in a far left dystopian nightmare.
I agree. Now I'm mindful of I've kept you for a while. I want to talk about reform for a second, because again I think reform have come out. The public are really getting behind them, but I've also seen quite a shift towards Nigel Farage, and some people are thinking that Nigel just wants to be accepted, by the media, and he's playing it too safe. He's more of a showman than a leader. Do you think that's true?
Well, I'm quite concerned about some of the things Nigel has said and some of the things he's doing. The things that concern me are that he hasn't democratized the party, which is a fundamental concern to me. I can't see how you can bang the drum for the democracy of the United Kingdom, saying that our elected politicians should take their lead from the people of the country, but not be prepared as leader of reform to take your lead from your members. There's something fundamentally wrong there, isn't there? And that then leads me into thinking, what the hell's going on? And then, if you analyze a number of things that Nigel has said over the last few years, and perhaps more importantly recently, he's saying things like, Brexit's done. In my view, it isn't. I'm still wearing a badge to prove it. Brexit's not done. We haven't left the EU. We're still caught in the morass of their regulations. He says that a united Ireland is inevitable. Absolutely no bloody way is a united Ireland inevitable. Northern Ireland is British, and it will always be British. And as far as I'm concerned, he's on the record saying that the rate of demographic change in the country doesn't concern him. Well, it bloody well concerns me. He's on the record saying that he's not in favor of mass deportation of illegal migrants because it's a logistical nightmare. I don't care how logistically nightmarish it is. Anyone who's entered this country has broken the law. They're a criminal. They should be detained and deported. And so I have an issue with all of that. And then he's done stuff like recruit Nick Candy to be the treasurer. Nick Candy, on the day that he was appointed treasurer of reform, said Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson were really great guys, first-class minds. Tony Blair was the architect behind all the things that you and I have been discussing, the Human Rights Act, the Companies Act 2006, the Equalities Act, they were his babies. He created this. Tony Blair created the problem that reform now needs to solve.
Yeah.
So you can't have a treasurer who thinks Tony Blair's a good guy. He hasn't thought this through, right? So that worries me. And then he had Charlie Mullins coming forward as a candidate for reform. Charlie Mullins, on the day that he declared he was going to stand for reform, declared that he wants to take us back into the European Union. I mean, what is Nigel doing?
Yeah.
You know, Nigel needs to explain himself. And Nigel has this uncanny ability to come across as being far right in some people's eyes.
I don't think he is. I don't think
No, he isn't. I think he's left wing.
Do you really think he's left wing?
I think he's heading over to the left. Yeah.
Yeah, I must admit, it kind of does seem to be swaying. That's why I said, he kind of wants to be accepted by the media. And he's a bit of a
and he's
showman.
allowing the centre of gravity to drag him back.
Yeah.
What he needs to do is drag the centre of gravity towards him, so that he can then deliver what needs to be done to save this country.
I think Rupert Lowe should be the leader.
Yeah, but of course.
I'm liking Rupert Lowe.
I love Rupert Lowe. I mean, Rupert and I are old, comrades in arms.
I've met him as well. He seems a nice guy.
Rupert's a great guy, but you can't change the leadership because Nigel owns the party. So.
Do you think the comment that Richard Tice made with that lot?
Yeah, it's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah,
comment.
it has. I mean, I think it's caused him a lot of damage. Do you think they can come back from that?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether Richard is a perfectly decent human being. Why he would castigate law-abiding British citizens without, it's part of this hijacking of free speech and not being prepared to just be commonsensical and speak the truth. He said that lot because he was currying favour with the mainstream again.
Yeah.
He was currying he's saying, well, don't worry, we're not extremists.
Yeah.
But there's nothing extreme about 100,000 law-abiding British citizens. Yeah. You can't say they're all far-right extremists.
I know. I mean, when we go to the protests, and I've started covering all the protests now, you have up to 100,000 people that are just, they've got concerns about kids being raped, about immigration.
Yeah.
That's not being far out. That's having genuine concerns. But what I don't see is any politicians apart from Nick Tenkone. I mean, I think Nick Tenkone has been great, if I'm honest, but he's the only person that actually comes out to these events. Now, if you look at the farmers' events, I was there quite recently.
Yeah, everyone's trying to get on the bandwagon.
Everyone's there. But why aren't they when you've got 100,000 people there?
Yeah, it's hijacked. The whole.
Are you going to come to the next one?
The centre of gravity is hijacked. That's why it is. Yeah, I probably will come to the next one. I'm
going to hold you to it. I'm going to play this interview. Okay. You're going to be there. But I'm going to let you get off because I could honestly be here all day with you. But thank you very much for speaking.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. And if you enjoy my journalism, then please head over to protectsammy.co.uk.